Morning, everyone. My name is Sandra Park. I'm currently a board member of AustCham Korea and the country manager of Woodside Energy. On behalf of AustCham Korea, I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to our Future of Mobility Roundtable, which brings together experts from a broad range of mobility industries. Now, before I officially open the industry discussion and introduce you to our four guest presenters today, I would like to invite Dr. Kyung Nam Shin, Assistant Director General and Head of Investment and Policy Solutions Division from the Global Green Growth Institute, to provide opening remarks. Dr. Shin, floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me express my gratitude to Australian Chamber of Commerce in Korea for organizing this important roundtable of future mobility. I'm pleased to speak on behalf of Global Green Growth Institute, GGGI, which was established as an international intergovernmental organization 2012 at the UN Conference on Sustainable Development. It is also our great pleasure to say that Australia Chamber of Commerce Korea and Wind Mobility are actively participating in the GGGI Blue Skies and Next Zero 2050 campaign. Let me start very briefly mentioning about GGGI and its activities. GGGI is supporting developing member countries to achieve sustainable and environment-friendly economic growth. GGGI has been supporting member countries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in line with Paris Agreement, create green jobs, increase access to sustainable services such as clean, affordable energy and sustainable waste management, improve air quality, sustain nature capital for proper supply of ecosystem services, and enhance adaptation to climate change. GGGI has recently set Strategy 2030. That is a 10-year plan to effectively support its member needs in shifting the economy towards environmentally sustainable and socially inclusive green growth. Under Strategy 2030, GGGI will expand its vision to achieve a low-carbon, resilient world of strong, inclusive, and sustainable growth. GGGI will be able to generate development agenda results that strongly demonstrate how it works, the scale of green growth, and capitalize partnership and also deliver impactful benefit to the global economy. The transport of humans and goods hold major economic and social importance in maintaining standards of consumption and quality of life. The transport sector is one of the main consumers of fossil fuel and hence is a major contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions, accounting for 29% total greenhouse gas emission as of 2019. The International Energy Agency, IEA, projects 50% higher transport emissions by 2060, with strong growth, especially in trucks and buses. This not only increase the fossil fuel dependency, but also lead to severe impact on social problems such as traffic congestion, poor health, resource use, and eventually cause climate change. The majority of national determined contribution NDC identify transport as a mitigation priority. Multiple countries made sustainable mobility pledges. The sustainability and electrification of transport is one of the mega trends in mobility and is an important pillar to achieve its decarbonization. Many countries have established targets to ban the sales of conventional cars as early as 2030. Driverless autonomous vehicles are being piloted in hundreds of cities across the world. Furthermore, ride-hailing companies have disrupted the market around the globe. Estimate are the shared electric autonomous vehicles can cut the number of cars. This would contribute to solving congestion and parking problem, enable drastic low carbon urbanization of urban system. In order to remain relevant and adaptable, challenging and uncertain future global transport environment, GGI has provided its investment in mainstreaming sustainable transport strategies into national, regional, local, and sectoral policy and development plan. Also, linking sustainable transport solutions to existing transport infrastructure and system investment. Furthermore, facilitating the participation of all the private sector in the sustainable transport industry. GGI has actively supported partnerships and country transport implemented in more than 20 countries, including Cambodia, Ethiopia, Fiji, Mexico, Rwanda, and Sri Lanka. To enhance country's green growth transformation in transport sector, GGI will keep prioritize leading innovative program projects, contributing to the organization's strategic objective in transport and sustainable mobility, and strengthening relevant stakeholders' capability with respect to the understanding of transport and relevant skill set and general project management. I sincerely hope that all of participants find this event very informative and worthwhile, and it serves as an occasion to boost our future mobility as a part of green transformation and carbon neutrality. I would like to express my appreciation to Australian Chamber of Commerce in Korea for organizing this roundtable on discussion for future mobility. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Shin. It is great to see organizations like GGGI bringing together private and public sector actors around the region to facilitate the effective implementation of green mobility projects. It is clear that mobility, both at individual and systematic level, is intrinsically tied to the green energy transition, with the sustainability and electrification of transport being one of the mega trends in mobility and an important pillar to achieve the decarbonization of the world. The deployment of electric vehicles over the past decade was driven by ambitious government policies to reduce oil demand in transport, not least with the view to the environmental benefits of tackling air pollution and climate change. Reflecting the positive alignment of policy and industry, electric cars in many markets are subject to a host of incentives and regulatory efforts. Nevertheless, industry disruptors often face policy hurdles, and policy change can sometimes lag behind industry innovation. It is therefore clear that strengthening the cooperation between public and private sectors across global markets is an essential step to effectively greening the future of mobility. To facilitate this dialogue, AustCham Korea, in partnership with GGGI, is pleased to bring together policy and industry experts for a special industry roundtable today on the future mobility. During today's virtual discussion, we will be hearing from 4 mobility experts: Adeel Ahmad, Project Director of Intralink; Hyun, Mobility Expert; Jeff Mannering, Managing Director of Audi Korea; Eric Wang, Co-founder and CEO of Wind Mobility. Each speaker will have 10 minutes to present, and at the end of the presentations, we will jump into a Q&A session where our 4 experts will address pre-submitted and live questions received via this Zoom platform. If you have any questions you'd like to raise, please make sure to type them in the Q&A tab. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite my fellow AustCham board member, Jeff Mannering, Managing Director of Audi Korea, to share his insight on the key trends driving mobility innovation in the automotive industry. Jeff commenced his career with Audi in 1998 in Australia and has been leading Audi Korea since September 2019. Previously responsible for Middle East region and Southeast Asia market, Jeff brings extensive global experience and insights into diverse facets of the automotive industry, having developed the strategies for business growth in many countries. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you for the introduction. That was my start of my 10 minutes, but yeah, just a little bit more. That career spanned over 25 years working for Audi in the automotive industry, which has been a great privilege. And hopefully I can give you some insights in where the future of mobility is going. Today, my discussion is a very brief, because I only have 10 minutes, because this topic is so broad now, on an automotive, or even broken down into a passenger car slant on the future of mobility. So I'll do my best to be brief, but to kick off, just to set the scene for this morning, I want to start with a very short video.
Are we? When are we?
We're descending toward Hill Valley, California on Wednesday, October 21st, 2015.
2015? The future. Unbelievable. Hoverboard. Where is he?
We at Audi have a strong philosophy regarding the exterior design. We want to build the most attractive and progressive cars also in the electric world.
So the prediction of the future from a perspective from the 80s, a lot of flying cars, and actually now probably some of the presenters today will talk about flying cars, so it's actually a reality. Not sure time travel is going to be part of the future of mobility, but the future is coming at an ever accelerating rate as the technology that's behind cars is progressing at breakneck speed. So what's actually are the mega trends driving the future of mobility? Firstly, electrification. 2, autonomous technology. 3, connectivity. And 4, probably shared mobility, or you could actually state it as mobility concepts and some of the topics that will come up later in the speech. But there's been mountains of research done over the last few years on this very broad topic, because the technology is progressing and the number of industries that are looking to take part in this future is very dynamic. But as I said, today I'm going to discuss it from a pure automotive or passenger vehicle point of view. So and I'm not speaking for other manufacturers, but nearly all current manufacturers are heading down this general route, and I'm going to explain why. And I can say that we at Audi are certainly heading down the road, as is the entire Volkswagen group. The topic is massive, and today I'm going to focus mostly on autonomous technology and electrification. Otherwise, I think we probably need a few days to discuss all the topics that we could actually spin off from this talk. But I would like to emphasize that these 4 trends are heavily interlinked. One without the other really doesn't allow us to achieve the goals required for a sustainable future, which technically is mandatory. So my strong opinion is, and it's already been discussed in the introduction, that the future is electric. So why do I actually say this? For one, and I can bring it right back to an Audi perspective, because we've made some decisive decisions and a very powerful move as we move into what I call the electric age. And this announcement only came a couple of weeks ago from our CEO. We've already launched a lot of SUVs in many markets around the world. The first was our e-tron, the full-size SUV, BEV, or battery electric car. And the picture, and in this picture that you see on the screen right now, it's actually our technological showcase, which will launch. It's launching in Europe now, and it'll launch in Korea in the next couple of months. And it's about it highlights the advancements in design, performance, and one topic that's important for an electric future is charging capabilities. The big decision that the company made is that from 2026, that every new model that's released worldwide will be electric. So we're going to phase out the production of our last internal combustion engines or petrol and diesel engines before 2035, because some of the models will run until 2035, but every new model will be electric, as the aim of the company is to achieve a net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest. Just having cars and electric cars is not the full picture. We also aim to have every one of our production facilities carbon neutral by 2025. We already have 2 out of the about 10 worldwide, and so we're already on a good way down that road. The overall sustainability is key for all our futures, and it's not just about the future of mobility. So what is my view on the key drivers of an electric future? Firstly, global emissions targets. Every industry, it doesn't matter what industry we're talking about, has a responsibility to reduce its carbon footprint. Actually, the Paris Agreement, it calls for about nearly an 8% reduction in CO2 emissions per year for the next decade to stop climate change. The overall transport industry contributes nearly 3/4 of the emissions, across the globe. And passenger vehicles, and I'm bringing it now back to passenger vehicles, has a significant part, or it contributes a significant part out of the entire transport industry. And all manufacturers have been set very clear and very challenging tasks to reduce greenhouse emissions across their entire fleet. So some of those targets that were set in about 2015 asked for about a 30% reduction by 2020, which is obviously last year, and now there's an additional 55% reduction by 2050. And it's probably more focused on European manufacturers, but globally, the targets aren't that much different. The general activities and on how to achieve these targets, it's pretty much discussed in the majority. I wouldn't say all the countries around the world, but the majority of countries around the world. And it's been discussed in the UN. And some of the activities to actually achieve these goals, and number one, is to dramatically speed up the deployment of low emission alternative energy sources for the transport industry, such as advanced biofuels, hydrogen fuel cell technology, and renewable fuel technology or synthetic fuel technology, all of which are at certain stages of development. Some are very, very advanced, but there is an enormous amount of energy and resources being mobilized for electrification and the removal of obstacles around the globe to electrify transport in general. The second point, probably why the future is electric, is the move towards zero emission vehicles that utilize the above energies I talked about. Whilst 100%, and I'll absolutely admit, to have 100% of cars on the road on the entire planet with electric drivetrains would solve the tailpipe issue. But the production of the electricity creates a challenge, as a large percentage of electricity production currently is still fossil fuel based. It's not a discussion for today because that discussion is a huge environmental discussion, but it actually brings forward one of the challenges about producing electricity. And number three is the significant development of increasing transport efficiency, especially in urban areas on a global scale. And this leads probably to the autonomous technology, which I'll come to in a few minutes. It also encompasses the digitalization or connectivity topic as well, and as well to the different mobility concepts as ride sharing and various usage models being investigated. And in some cases, they're already implemented. Some of the government policies that's pushing an electric future is consumer subsidies when you buy an electric car, and as well as the subsidies and reduced electricity prices for renewable and environmentally friendly produced electricity in your house for home charging. It's actually being embedded in a lot of countries around the world. One country's policy that's probably having a major influence on the rest of the world is some of the policies coming out of China at the moment. China, it's arguably the largest automotive market on the planet, and it's said by 2035 there will be no more internal combustion or petrol and diesel engines sold by 2035. 50% of the vehicles either have to be battery electric or fuel cell, and the other 50 have to be a hybrid, which is electric technology anyway. And many of the countries around the world are actually following these goals, and that includes Korea right now, which is also looking at targets like this. The investment in the infrastructure for electrification, its high-speed charging capability is exploding, and Korea, just to bring it home a little bit closer to where we all live, it's in the top 3 or 4 countries in the world for access to fast charging stations. A lot of people think America and Europe is way advanced, but actually Korea is one of the leaders in public charging infrastructures around the world. And just a little statistic, you only have to drive about 35 kilometers maximum to get to the next high-speed public charger, which is fantastic. Another reason I say that the electric is future is the amount of cars that is getting launched in the market, into the global market. And it's to meet the emissions target. The technology is already here, the electric technology, and it's very advanced. The technology in batteries themselves has dramatically improved, even over the last 12 to 18 months. And what consumers are looking at is how fast can I charge my car, and actually how far can I drive my car. That's probably the 2 biggest consumer topics that we as a passenger car industry have to overcome. And an example, that the car that was up there before, the e-tron GT, it can be charged in a 270 kilowatt charger to 80% capacity in a little over 10 minutes. So if you go back a few years, it probably took a day to charge an electric car. And it was only 2 or 3 years ago that the range of a battery allowed a car to probably travel about 80 or 90 kilometers. And today with the technology, you can drive more than 600 kilometers. And I'm not specifically talking about our products, but all the products that are available in the world. So there's some of the reasons why I think the future is very electric. Now, it leads me on to the autonomous focus they want to talk about. And I want to actually not give a definition of autonomous driving, but for a non-automotive person, I've tried to make it very simple to explain what we're talking about. A lot of you probably would have heard of level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It actually sounds like the COVID alert at the moment, but it's not actually that. But I'd like to say it in the following way. So level 1, if we start at level 1, is everything on. So you need your hands, feet, eyes to control the car. Then it would be level 2, feet off. Then level 3 is hands off. Level 4 is probably eyes off, or it is eyes off. And level 5 is what the perception is of a fully car in control, where the occupants are truly the passengers. Today, and the black arrow at the top is probably where the industry is. It's pretty well advanced. We're probably somewhere between level 3 and level 4. And it doesn't, and I'm not saying that we're introducing these technologies yet, because there's a lot of infrastructure and government controls and regulations and policies that need to be in place, because there's a lot of topics that come with this. Again, a different discussion for a different time. So the time when fully autonomous capable cars is available has a way to go from market to market, and it will be market to market depending on the government implementation. Even COVID, which is a very hot topic for us everywhere around the world, has probably impacted, I wouldn't say dramatically slowed down, but it's certainly put a little dent in the progression of some of the technologies to a certain degree. And I would actually say that 18 or 2 years ago, nobody sitting in this webinar would have actually thought that we would be in a global pandemic. And I think that's probably a true black swan event. However, the future technology, even up to level 4, is actually here already. The car can actually go to level 4. It's an enormous discussion. Will we ever get to a general consumer in passenger cars of level 5? I would suggest it's going to take some time, because I think it's really where this level 5 or full autonomous technology will take us is more topics like robo-taxis or shuttle services. That will probably come first before it's a private passenger car, because it can be controlled. It's much easier to utilize that technology in a controlled environment. also the government policy and liability and infrastructure in the environment itself for the cars to be able to read where they are and communicate with other cars still has some way to go. And that alone is a massive discussion, and it's a challenge for society in general because of privacy and how we actually, the data is being used. And in saying this, I'm not saying that it's a negative, because in saying that, even countries like Korea are dedicating testing areas for self-driving cars right now. A lot of countries are testing the technology to see how they move forward with the development of policies and the infrastructure topics that they need to invest in to make sure the cars work. But the technology driving us to this autonomous capability is continuing at a very rapid pace. And in the future, an autonomous vehicle will be more efficient. It actually will be safer, and it will be utilized more than a vehicle is today. Because technically, well, statistically, a privately owned passenger car is utilized for about 5% and lays idle for 95% of its day. And I say that because a fully autonomous car will be able to do tasks alone without a driver, and therefore it's used more efficiently. So some of the key drivers and why I'm talking about autonomous as a future, as the future of mobility. And I want to start in the middle of this slide and talk about the dollar sign. And it's kind of links a little bit to the connect megatrend that I showed earlier. And connectivity to the environment or the infrastructure creates mass opportunities for the future. McKinsey did a study, and it's doing a lot of studies on the future of mobility, and it's estimated that the additional market revenues in mobility services alone by about 2040 will probably be more than $1 trillion. That's on top to the almost another $1 trillion in revenues from autonomous vehicle sales themselves, and the additional tasks that the car will be able to undertake adds even more economic benefits to those people that are in those industries. Just in car infotainment alone, the technology alone and the additional services that are already planned to be available in the next 3 to 4 years will be about a $22 billion industry as a spin-off in the technology advances in that short time. And that's why I'm saying the future of mobility from an automotive point of view is definitely autonomous. The phrase, the Internet of Things and the impact of the global megatrend, big data, is going to change, in my opinion, our lives completely in the not too distant future, because we are going to be completely autonomous in some way, shape or form. And I said previously, technology companies, and you can see some of the companies up there, are paving the way in collaboration with us, the automotive companies, to ensure that they're not left behind. And we can argue both ways. It could be that they're left behind or the automotive companies are left behind. And automotive companies are much more open to joining forces with these companies, and as well as joining forces with other automotive companies. As an example, Ford and Volkswagen Group have a collaboration to share the platform of full BEV cars, and that's where the battery sits in the floor of the car, because it provides many synergies and it actually reduces costs for the electric cars in the future. And back to the left of the charts, car sharing companies, which is something I haven't really touched on today, but such as Uber and Lyft around in Europe, and Uber's probably more global, they want to be part of this future as well. So this car sharing development is another topic for discussion on a different day on its own, because it's also a very big topic, but some interesting opportunities not far away. And Audi as a key focus, a little spiel for the Audi at the end of the presentation, or nearly the end of the presentation. We want to become, and it's our core value now, the leading provider of sustainable mobility. As the traditional automotive company, in my opinion, will not survive too far into the future if they don't take this change on. And now, just in conclusion, what's happened in the automotive industry over the last 2 or 3 years is actually more than has happened over the previous 100 years. And the rate of change is accelerating minute by minute. And however, there will be no future if these changes are not sustainable. And I brought some of the points up in the presentation. And the future of mobility brings a multitude of challenges with the electricity production, as an example that I talked about. And it's not just the automotive industry, but all industries. And it changes the entire business landscape. And we're in the beginning of the rapid change right now. However, we're on the way to the future. So from Audi and from Jeff, thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Jeff. How exciting to think of some of the future of our mobility side that will affect every day of our life. Okay, now moving the focus to exploring how some of these trends play out here in Korea, I'm pleased to welcome Adeel Ahmad, Project Director at Intralink, as our second industry expert. Adeel has significant experience in South Korea's mobility sector, working with clean energy, urban air mobility, and machine vision solutions, where he has worked with automotive OEMs, major conglomerates, and government agencies. He has worked at Intralink for more than 5 years, during which time he has secured licensing and sales revenues for international firms with Korea's largest groups, including Samsung Electronics, LG Electronics, and Hyundai Motor Company. Adeel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think what I'll be doing is just really quickly walking you through some of the key mobility trends that I've seen over the past, let's say, year or so, or even the last several months here in Korea. Just a quick maybe explanation of what it is that Intralink does before we get started. We are a business development consultancy that helps companies, typically North American or European tech firms, do business in Korea, China, and in Japan. Those you can see, we have offices all across Europe, Australia, and Israel as well. And really what we offer is a chance to explore strategic markets in Korea, China, or Japan in a fast and effective way. And the way we do that is through the contacts that we have across the large groups in Asia, including in Korea, of course, the key players in the mobility space. When I talk about mobility, I think obviously you can look at it in a lot of different ways. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll be talking about automotive, specifically looking at autonomous vehicles, ride hailing or ride sharing, as well as micromobility, and UAM, also known sometimes as a vertical takeoff and landing, or VTOL. Just a quick overview of mobility in Korea. I think Korea is, of course, well known for its strengths in the automotive sector. Obviously, the presence of the Hyundai Motor Group, Hyundai, Kia, Genesis, but also its strengths in connected cars, thanks to, I think, the excellent infrastructure, the widespread deployment of 5G. Before that, of course, 4G, the high smartphone penetration rate, I think extremely high spending on R&D. I think if you look at number of patents filed or the percentage of GDP spent on R&D, I think Korea is among the top 3 or top 5 globally. So all these things combined, I think some of these legacy strengths in automotive, as well as the strengths in its tech industry, make Korea, I think, a very interesting testbed for various mobility applications. And then I think what makes Korea quite attractive for various applications within mobility is the fact that a deal with Korea is potentially a global deal if you're able to sell into Hyundai, or maybe just stepping outside slightly the mobility box. If you're selling into a Hyundai, an SK, and LG, that deal has the potential to be a very large deal. One maybe an interesting note on mobility in Korea is that there is a very limited presence for ride-sharing platforms, whether that's global platforms such as Uber, or maybe even a large national platform such as what you see with Didi in China. And then finally, there's significant influence on mobility through government industrial policy, an excellent example of which is the $186 billion Korean New Deal, which was announced last year, which aims at kind of a very large-scale decarbonization of all aspects of the economy, if not society. And here is a look at the key players in the mobility sector. Some of these are, of course, quite well known. Some of them are perhaps a little bit unexpected. So I think Hyundai is perhaps known around the world. Kakao, if you've spent some time in Korea, is quite well known. I think it's best known for, obviously, its messaging platform, its kind of cute emoticons, but I think it leverages its strengths in messaging, in kind of its mapping app, then its taxi hailing app to create this large platform through which it can introduce other services. I think recently they announced, looking at potentially logistics and deliveries as well. I think a couple of startups to highlight. 42 Dot is a company that is quite active in managing autonomous vehicles. Strategian, which is a Korean startup, I think now largely in the US. It's a client that Intralink has worked with in both Japan and in China. And they offer, as the name suggests, vision systems for autonomous vehicles. And then maybe a couple other names. UT is a joint venture between SK Telecom and Uber. Doosan, Hanwha, Hyundai Mobis are some of the larger manufacturing groups. Mobis is one of the largest tiers. And then Korean Air, obviously, is the well-known national carrier, but they have recently expressed interest in looking at some of the urban air mobility applications, the so-called flying taxis. Excuse me. So the first trend to highlight is major investments in autonomous vehicles. The sector, of course, as I mentioned, is dominated by companies within the Hyundai Motor Group. 6 million vehicles sold annually worldwide. Hyundai has announced plans to have all its vehicles connected by 2025, and that's driven by, from Hyundai, a massive $116 billion investment in future mobility technologies. And the goal, to touch on, as Jeff mentioned, is to commercialize level 4 in the coming years, and that's backed also by 1.3 billion in government funding. And obviously, it's not just the OEMs. You've got telcos and tech companies such as Naver Labs active in the space, as are the tiers. The picture you see there at the bottom is a KT connected car. Obviously, it's a Hyundai car, but operating on KT's connected car infrastructure at a autonomous vehicle testbed site in Hwaseong, south of Seoul. The second trend to highlight is that ride-hailing seems to be finding a way. So Korea, in some sense, has been a graveyard for ride-sharing. Uber tried in 2013, 2014, but the fact that they were not using registered cabs, led them to withdraw from the market. Tada tried later on, 2018 to 2020, using a loophole where you could hire vans with at least 11 seats if they weren't taxis. That loophole was closed. Kakao floated the idea of a carpool, and I think around the same time, 2018, but withdrew in the face of protests. Now, Kakao obviously is dominant. Kakao's Kakao Taxi, I think now it's called Kakao T. It's dominant in the cab hailing space. SKT's T-Map is another competitor. But you're also seeing now a joint venture between SK and Uber, UT, which I mentioned earlier, and that's working with taxi companies in this cab hailing space. And then car sharing app SoCar, which is one of I think the larger unicorn startups in Korea, is also entering this ride hailing space. The third trend to highlight is urban air mobility, which is taking off. I think one thing Korea does very well is new technologies that perhaps are slightly in the realm of science fiction. So there's a government-led urban air mobility project aiming for flying cars by 2025. Realistically, I should say flying taxis by 2025. And you've got some major players: Doosan, Hyundai, Korean Air. Doosan is a large manufacturer. And then you've also got some defense contractors leveraging their strengths in aerospace. I think it's something that a lot of big groups here see as offering significant potential for future growth over the long term. Testing will begin in 2022, and the idea is that by 2025, you'd have taxis flying from central Seoul to Incheon Airport. The fourth trend to highlight is micromobility. I think the rapid growth in recent years, and then over the past year or so, some regulation in the sector. So if you've spent some time in Seoul over the past couple of years, you have probably seen people on these scooters, which are, I think, a very convenient way to get around town, especially at rush hour when the traffic is quite backed up. It's something that both local and national governments have invested in different ways, both as part of general transportation, eco-friendly policies, as well as, I think, targeted projects as part of smart city projects. Scooters are quite dominant, as are bikes. The number of scooters doubled in the past year. I think estimates vary, but I think the number in Seoul alone is about 60,000. And it's I think a market where there's a lot of players active: Kakao, Wind, Lime, Xingqing. But what we've seen in the past year, especially, is that I think just because there's so many bikes, so many scooters now, there's now regulations in terms of requiring helmets, in requiring people to have driver's licenses if they're going to operate a scooter, as well as fines on, I think, both users and carriers, if they're parking illegally. So those are the key trends I wanted to highlight, and then maybe I'll just touch on some of the success stories that we've seen in this space for our clients here in Korea. And then I'll also maybe just touch on some of the challenges related to doing business, particularly when it comes to mobility in Korea. So I think just in some general terms, areas where our clients have found interest and have really succeeded in kind of some broad terms, without naming names, would be core technology for fuel cell electric vehicles, sensor technologies both for autonomous vehicles as well as UAMs, and then finally we had a company that offers remote operations for autonomous vehicles, doing fairly well. Now, if we look at some of the challenges when it comes to doing business in Korea, I think overseas, if you can broadly express, this is the pain point that I'm trying to address, and here's what we're hoping to be able to do in 2-3 years' time. I think that is something where customers and investors are interested in working with you. I think in Korea, you really need to have your I's dotted and your T's crossed when it comes to the technology. As customers, these large groups will really want to do a deep dive into the technology, how it works, what are its limitations, what are the applications that it's best suited for. So it can be quite detail oriented very quickly. Another challenge is the lack of a local presence. I think obviously in Australia, the time zones are not as much of an issue. Obviously, the distances and so it can be obviously not speaking the language and doing business from overseas, whether that's time zones or the distance. And then finally, regulatory challenges. So we've seen in kind of different cases that we have a client with an interesting technology, but as Uber saw, I think that's it's quite a well-known case. The regulations in Korea, looking at things quite maybe nitty-gritty as frequency bands or standards that the government has mandated for different sectors, those don't match up with what overseas companies may offer, even though the technology may be stellar and quite ready for the market. So that is really the presentation that I had prepared. I hope this was informative, and I look forward to continuing the discussion during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adeel. Conscious time, I would like to introduce our next speaker, a presenter. Next, we're very pleased to welcome Eric Wang, co-founder and CEO of Wind Mobility, who will be sharing insights into the role of micromobility or so-called last mile mobility solutions during and after the pandemic. Eric has extensive startup experience, having also co-founded bike sharing and ride sharing startups in Germany and China before his experience with Wind Mobility, which is a scooter sharing company operating in Europe, Israel, and Asia. Welcome, Eric, and thank you for making the time to join us from the European time zone.
No worries. Thanks. Very much appreciate it. I'm really glad to join the presentation today, and I really appreciate the Australia Chamber of Commerce and the Global Green Institute, Global Growth Initiative for organizing this event, as well as our partnership. So just a quick background, right, on Wind in Korea. We're a scooter sharing company and a micromobility sharing company. We actually started as a bike sharing company back in 2017 in Germany, and now we have an operation across the world, right, in Italy, France, UK, Iceland, Israel, and Korea. So we have started in Korea for the very beginning of the scooter sharing, and for more than 2-3 years now. And our current operations Busan, Seoul area, and as well as Jeju and Suwon, a number of these places. And we have 20 people in Korea, and as well as a fleet of proprietary e-scooters. Korea as a market is very interesting for us. It's a very technology adaptive customer base, and it's a very high dense environment, right? It's probably one of the highest density places in the world, right? Where it's good for scooter sharing in the urban environment. The public infrastructure is very good. The road is very good. And in fact, in our 2 to 3 year of operation in Korea, we have never lost a single scooter, right? Which is very unusual. And in terms of where we see in Korea, it's Korean spends around 1.5 hours on commute and in traffic, and in Seoul this is quite high, and 85% of all cars are single occupant. But in terms of for scooters, what we see is 7 to 12 minutes of average ride time in Korea, and our global average is slightly higher. And then driving distance between 0.5 to 2 kilometers, basically average is 1.5 kilometer. In terms of COVID, we see that in the spring of 2019, where everything was shut down, right? It was a big challenge for the scooter sharing company. We were at a stage where where does it take us? The industry is relatively young; it's only 3-year-old, and during COVID there was no usage, given that most places in lockdown. Actually, what we see was Korea was at the forefront of this, right? Because Korea's mobility movement eased earlier than other market. We have seen that scooter actually has picked up quite significantly, as soon as the lockdown is eased, given that people prefer more socially distant transport option rather than using subways or public transit. So we decided to stay on course and continue to invest in innovation and customer service, right, to optimize all the operation across market. So that really helped paid off, right, for our growth in Korea. We have I would say just quickly share our metrics, right, since when we started versus COVID time, right? It's actually quite a good growth, right, in terms of usage, in terms of ridership, and we're seeing 3 rides per scooter per day, and we also see that more and more cities are allocating public spaces from cars to e-scooter, and as well as to pedestrian and bicycles. And even during the winter months, our uptake of scooters multiple times higher than was pre-COVID season. We see record numbers during the summer and expecting this trend to continue, right? So, and we see also more and more city tours allowing e-scooter in their street and public tender and public procurement process. And not only in Korea, but in other markets that we're seeing as well. City are building more and more dedicated bicycle lanes, and actually very much encourage adoption of scooter. And as the desire for social distance commute accelerate, basically the integration of micromobility into the urban transport system. The second is, scooters sometimes, unfortunately get the bad rap of, whether just only be used by tourists, right? And for seeing the city, but that's not the case, actually. The vast majority of scooter usage is used by local resident, right? Here, we have done surveys in our, from our own user base where, roughly 1/3 of scooter usage is from commuting to work. Right. So, and then about 20% is running errands, right? And as well as, for seeing friends and relatives, and only about 30% or so, right? It's, leisure. And, this is, we see consistent data, across some different markets, but some market even has more residents heavy in terms of usage. So scooter in a way is helping, become an integral part of your urban fabric system. And I want to share the second hypothesis, it's become a primary right for urban commuter, right? As I shared the stats earlier from a user survey, this is the stats from our own metric by the hours. Right, we see, the morning bump, right, in terms of usage, and a significant afternoon bump, right, and these are two commute times, right, we see the highest usage, and basically, what we're seeing is that, the people use scooter for the desired purpose to cover first and the last mile journey, where significant portion of that journey actually end up in the public transit, right, which are bus stop or train station. So, and COVID actually helps, accelerating this development. And three, the e-scooter here to stay, while city tours more multimodal transport system, the pandemic has really drawn scooter become part of integrated part of this system. We will see more e-mobility offerings in city like scooters, e-bike, moped, as well as other modes. City have fundamentally changed the way to move and commute, and we're very proud to be part of this this development. So in our view, scooter is here to stay, right? And this is our conversation with multiple cities as well as the city across Europe, Korea, and Middle East is the scooters are here to stay. The city actually wanted to have a larger share of their trips down on micromobility. Besides Korea, for instance, Tel Aviv specific states that they want 25% of the trips happen in the city down on micromobility, and scooter sharing is a significant part of that. And so we are really seeing a shift, right, from adoption of cars, right, into scooters, into public transit, into other mobility, and we're proud to be part of this. So that's a quick sharing from my side, right, and happy to take any questions going forward. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Eric. How exciting to see to share some of the how this automotive industries are developing all together with automotive and micro mobility and electrification. Okay, now I would like to introduce Casey Hyun again. Sorry, I was on mute. He's a future mobility expert and an active figure within the Australia-Korea space to share his insight into how design has underpinned the innovation within the mobility industry. Casey is an international multi-award-winning designer and a strategist, business consultant, and a futurist.
Well, thank you very much. It's absolutely fantastic to be part of such a distinguished guest. I kind of in dwarfed comparison to some of the very well-known and successful designers and panelists who are participating today. And as you can see from my screen, this was supposed to be a 4-hour presentation, which I did for Korea Moti. So prologue, we talk about everything, as Jeff mentioned, everything is related to COVID pandemic. It's been on for about 1.5 years, but believe it or not, the sales of EV electric vehicles by numbers and percentage of growth have both increased. And it is expected that the sales will continuously increase in exponential growth for the at least next decade or so. So until the end of 2020s, until 2030s, you can expect a steady and very healthy growth of EV sales by both numbers and vehicle numbers. In 2020, just last year, 14 traditional auto manufacturers owned or either controls 54 brands. However, at the same time, there are over 400, I actually counted this myself, 400 EV and alternative energy mobility brands around the world, which produce road registered vehicles. So believe it or not, over 400 EV startups, alternative energy startups, have actual registered vehicles on road last year. And this was the largest number of auto brand registered in a year over a century. So since the end of World War I, we have seen the greatest number of EV and alternative energy vehicles registering their vehicles to be driven on road. And as history suggests, a market saturation and vacuum of power, it usually signals something, a major breakthroughs or segment reorganizations or a great revolutionary changes. And as you can see from the news you've read, you've seen end of last year, Fiat Chrysler Automobiles and PSA Group have merged into a new company called Stellantis. So I've actually forecasted this early last year. Two things would happen. One of them will be pivoting their core business, or number two was merge or form an alliance, not just for survival, but for thrive as well, which just happened. So 2021 is vital for mobility industry. I believe changes never seen before is set to hit in the next 5 years. So just going very quickly through to the what we call obstacles for mobility design innovation. The reason I said 2020 is significant is not just because of the numbers. It just sounds good, 2020. But 2020 actually signals 250th year of the invention of the first, what we call modern automobile. So steam engine, which was developed in 1769 or 1770, depending on the historian, the different perspective historians. Its first innovation was to replace power source, but the overall vehicle structure and architecture has not changed since the first development of this steam train in 1769, 1770. So engine at the front wheels, and the front row of the seat right behind the front wheels, and the rear wheels and platform and what we call chassis. It has not changed in over 2.5 centuries. And still to this day, electric vehicle design and autonomous vehicle design has stayed largely the same. It's based on cosmetic changes, what we call ornamental changes. And I believe electric vehicle design is more than just automobile plus a plug-in source minus the front grille. I believe the new vehicle design paradigm must possess functional aesthetics, but also brand characterizing identities to differentiate itself from the incumbent. So there are a few changes which I would forecast for the audiences to reference. Number one would be shifting consumer preferences. a lot of people, especially from Australia, there are a lot of consumers are very discontent with the rise of SUVs and crossover body packaging. However, unfortunately, for some of the people who disdain this massive SUVs and crossover vehicles, this trend will continue for much longer period than expected. And the reason why it is set to be the main body style in the future is because it was never out of trend. The SUV vehicle proportion is much closer to the original vehicle proportion from the early 20th century. SUVs are here to stay, so much so that it will almost decimate other body type. You know, I'm being a little bit to the extreme that I believe that a large number of vehicles that we see these days are being what we call very popular and loved by the mass-produced, to the general end consumers, have eerily similar body style and packaging proportion to the vehicles from the turn of the 20th century, that is. The second kind of change that we could expect is of the many future changes possible in the vehicle packaging. Two changes are most likely to be implemented early and permanently. That is the electric vehicles and autonomous vehicle to have much what we call a swooping one box body style compared to what we see previously. As you can see from here, excuse me, the Mercedes-Benz S-Class and its sister vehicle of Mercedes-Benz EQS, you see much of the flowing and swooping one body, one package, one body style. And this is due to the fact that the electric vehicle have much lower center of gravity, allowing more vehicles to add weight to the top half of its frame, also for aerodynamics and also for expression of the future. Expect even premium sedan to follow this package layout, as you can see from the EQS. I have not seen this vehicle in person yet, but I can definitely say the overall vehicle will look much larger than what you actually see from the image. So going to the exterior design, some of the design changes. I believe the exterior design changes for the electric vehicle and autonomous vehicle will be closer to an evolutionary change rather than a revolutionary change. Development of EV design changes will be less prominent, while the changes from the internal combustion engine to electric vehicle will be significant and is significant. And design changes for both tech and perception reason will be slightly slower. So the Lucy there, which was launched recently, it has a very similar packaging to the conventional premium sedan, Hyundai Ioniq 5, which actually shares a much closer, although difference in size, much closer proportion to the traditional 5-door hatchback. And also the Rivian R1T, which is set to be produced sometime soon, sharing its platform with Ford Motor Corporation. The Ford is actually providing the factory manufacturing line as well. But this shows a very similar kind of, almost identical kind of shape as to the pickup truck. Also, this creates a lot of dead space, a space which is created by accident, but also has functionality, but by accident. And also the exterior design will have much flatter, squarer, and boxier style. It's due to because there's a premium on aerodynamic and functionality. And also, as you can see from Jaguar Land Rover projects, and extreme wheel position to the corner as well. Going to the interior very quickly, a free space, cab forward and single seating first row, and also swivel seats and more flexible movement. This is due to the change that we actually see from autonomous vehicles. There's less reason for drivers to actually, passengers to think about what's going on outside, and also the interior as a living space instead of what we call a driving cockpit. And also replace and update, as you can, as a lot of people from tech industry will say, automobile have much longer life cycle than electric products, 3-to-1 ratio. So a lot of interior materials and tech are outdated by the time the vehicle is being sold or vehicle is repurchased. So I believe there's going to be a simpler, minimalistic interior with replaceable and upgradable parts necessary. So external influence that we see right now is, I'm just going to end it very quickly here. These are some of the vehicles. The one on the left is 1960s vision of the future and 2010's vision of the future. A lot of designers do see, and a lot of general public do see as this as a future, and future of the design and how the design is going to change. But as designers are human, we are not free from the cultural and sociological influence that we are given at that certain time of the design development. So in the 1950s and the 60s, these kind of fighter jets and airplanes and speed was at premium. 2010 minimalistic design that we see from Apple was a very strong influence of the designers at that time. So designers are trying to develop something which is new and towards the future, yet we are in some ways limited by the culture and the society that we live in at this moment. So just to conclude, I would like to say definite changes are coming. Hydrocarbon energy will and should be eventually be phased out, and alternative energy source will be hailed as a solution for the future. As the president of managing director of Audi Korea has mentioned, it is definitely going to happen. And it's time for the third revolution of mobility. So the first mobility revolution was about invention of the mobility. The pure invention of horseless carriage was the first revolution. And then came to the second revolution, which provided better quality, desirable products, yet unfortunately without no real technological advancements. But now what we are facing, the third revolution of mobility, will have the greatest impact by overhauling everything which we have known about mobility, automobile, and cars until now. So coming back to the prologue, are we all ready for the future? So thank you very much, and I hope you have enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Casey. Listening to all presenters working for an energy company, today's session gave me a lot of challenges and homework, lots of things to think about. Now, I would like to kick off the question Q&A session, and I have two questions for our speakers to kickstart as the discussion. Okay. I'd like to start with Jeff. What role have sustainability concerns played in driving innovation in the mobility industry? Jeff, in your presentation, you mentioned the Paris Agreement and concerns about the reducing the emission. Could you talk a little bit more about how sustainability concerns played in driving innovation in the mobility sector?
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, every industry has a part to play in reducing their carbon footprint, because just the world technically could explode one day if the temperature keeps rising the way that it is. Now, there's many people that could argue that, and there's many people that don't believe it, but the amount of carbon and greenhouse gases that the automotive industry puts into the air, and when I say automotive, I'm not just talking about passenger cars, it's the whole entire transport industry. I think it's important that all those industries which is a significant contributor to those emissions, has to do something. And that's what is driving the progressive technology. The R&D developers are looking, that's why I say electric is the future. Even with combustion engines at the moment and the emissions targets in the Paris Accord, it's reducing. Every major manufacturer in the world has to reduce their emissions output of the tailpipe, no matter what happens. Even if electric didn't come, this would come anyway. And that's probably the key to the technology, or the driver behind the technology to reduce or become more efficient. From a design point of view, Casey just talked about it. Aerodynamics plays a role, and then for autonomous, it's also, and forget even electric cars, autonomous IC, internal combustion engines. If we weren't going to alternative fuels, you have to become more efficient to reduce greenhouse gases. So that's what I think the big reason is behind that push.
Thank you for your insight, Jeff. Okay, now I'd like to move on to Adeel for next question. In terms of sustainability, hydrogen has been a definite buzzword in the energy sector, but it has a key role to play in the mobility as well. Adeel, could you please possibly share some thoughts on what has been the uptake of the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles in the last 2 years? And has the relative pricing to the internal combustion engine vehicles appreciated? Adeel, you're on mute.
Sorry. So I think for hydrogen vehicles, the number of cars on the road, I think, has grown a lot. I think it's somewhere in the range of, I think I've got it written down here, somewhere in the range of about 1,000. So I think it's growing quite rapidly from where it was, even a year ago, certainly where it was a few years ago. I think it's become, I think part of that growth is driven by I think the range of the cars on the road. I think really the only one on the road is the Hyundai Nexo. It's become also more affordable thanks to government subsidies. So I think the price is somewhere in the range of 70 million Korean won, which I believe is, I want to say 90,000 Australian dollars. But I think about 30 to 40% of that, depending on who you are and where in the country you are, you get back through government subsidies. So you're looking at somewhere in the range of then 50 to 60,000 Australian dollars, which makes it, I think, more affordable. Still probably a bit on the high range, but I think not as I guess as expensive as perhaps the sticker price would suggest.
Good information. Okay, now I'd like to move on to Eric for next question. Are e-scooters truly sustainable considering they need to be recycled at some point? And how is Wind is ensuring sustainable operations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think at the very beginning of the e-scooters industry, this was very much a hot topic, right? Because scooter at that time was only a personal scooter. As a reminder, scooter has been only around for a few years. As a hardware product, the iteration cycle has at least take a year and a half to happen. And so at the very beginning, most operators were only using personal scooter to deploy them on the market, and that unfortunately only lasts a few weeks. Right. So then you get a lot of bad rap about, the sustainability of a scooter and, the product life cycle and etc. So we have developed our own scooter, and we believe this scooter can last 3 to 5 years. Right. So, we have already been deploying this scooter for over 18, 19 months now. So we're quite satisfied with their performance. And so first, key to sustainability is to increase your hardware life cycle. Right. So, and that we have done, already. And the second is within your hardware, to use as much recycled material as possible. Right. And, and also at the end of your hardware life, we recycle all our batteries, right, to give it to third party to have a second life. Right. And then even for our old scooters, right, we we retire them from fleet, but we also give to we retrofit them, we test them, and then we give for personal usage, right? And so it has another second life after the the sharing fleet. And three is we use renewable energy, right, for our charging mechanism, right? So and now the market, we only choose renewable energy sources as to charge the scooters. And then we also, as a company, we're carbon neutral, right? So each year we actually try to offset any additional carbon footprint we have, right? And by supporting other projects and to have a carbon neutral, right? And then as a company, sustainability is one of our core value, right? One of the 6 core value of the company. And we actually only use Office that's LEED certified, that has, carbon neutral footprint. Our papers at the office is only recycled paper. So a lot into building a DNA culture in the company that focuses sustainability as well, right? So value sustainability. So overall, we view ourselves as a startup, a new company, and we really want to support that sustainability and long-term sustainability aspect of not only our industry, but the market we operate, the city that we operate, the society. So I'm happy personally with our progress. I think scooter is a sustainable part of that revolution.
Great answer. Thank you. Now I'd like to move on to some of the live answers live questions that we're receiving at the moment as we speak. I'll go to, so happy to have anyone if you can answer. Okay, so the first question, in the past year, some automotive engineers have commented that vehicles are being designed by the wind tunnel. Is the importance of aerodynamics now becoming less critical with the electric vehicles? May I have a volunteer?
I'll be happy to answer that. I think let me just look at the question, the aerodynamics. The wind tunnel and aerodynamics is actually more important than ever because of the situation we're in. I mean, electric vehicle is, I'm also a proponent of that. Alternative fuel energy, I'm also a proponent of that. But we do understand that the technology development is at a relatively early stage, which means that there's still a great room for improvement. And as the future is the electric vehicle and the alternative fuel energy vehicle, there are areas that still need to be improved. And I believe by creating a more aerodynamic efficient vehicle is imperative to, is important and advantageous to many of these aspects of electric vehicles for extending the range, not only for the cosmetic or the design aspect, styling, aesthetic aspect, but for the function and technology as well. So yes, electric vehicle, it's the EVs might look like it's not as important for the aerodynamic, but it's actually more critical these days than ever before because of the efficiency the vehicle is trying to create. And yeah, it's so I'm not trying to disagree with the question, but definitely it is more important than ever trying to create something which is aerodynamic and more efficient in terms of fuel efficiency.
Thanks for that, Casey. Now I'd like to address the next question. Next question, I think it's for you, Jeff. The Volkswagen Group says the hydrogen is not the way to go. Toyota and Hyundai are keeping the dream alive. Your perspective, if you can share something.
Yeah, I think the question also said that I think the person's name is Kurt. He said if I could produce something that transforms something into hydrogen in the car, would we be interested in it? I'm sure any manufacturer would be interested in it if you could actually do it, and I'm not sure where we are in that technology. But Dr. Dees probably is saying that, well, I know he's saying that for the Volkswagen Group, we are heading down the road of electrification because all the investment is done, the technology, and I'm not saying anything against hydrogen because I know Hyundai, especially Korean manufacturers, are very heavily focused or have been in the past and still are on hydrogen technology and fuel cell technology. Even some of the other German manufacturers are still focusing on it. But currently the technology right now in where our company sits, electrification is our road and our major focus of the future. And that's why Dr. Dees actually said that.
Thanks. Jeff, there's another question for you, the live chat. In Korea, how standardized or compatible are the charging stations with the different types of EVs?
Yeah, to answer it with 100% conviction, I cannot because I was not here. I've only been here 8 or 19 months, but I would absolutely suggest that all manufacturers that produce cars in any country, it doesn't have to be Korea, that they decide on what charging plug that you use. There's a European standard, there's a US standard, and there's a Japanese standard. And I'm pretty sure that we have the European standard, and I can't remember the type. There's an actual electric type there, and the homologation departments in Korea actually approve it. But all the cars that I know of are compatible at the high speed charging. The issue that some cars may have is a software issue where the chargers don't actually talk to the car, but the plugs actually fit. And that's a collaboration between the suppliers of the chargers and the automotive manufacturers. And in preparation to launch a car, you've got to make sure that your software works with the software of the charger, which is a responsibility of us, of Audi or whatever manufacturer launches a car.
Thank you. Okay, now I'd like to move a question to Eric. Eric, road safety is always a hot topic in the mobility discussions, both in the automotive sector and also with the uptake in new unregulated technologies such as e-scooters. Could you share some insights on how to convince the government that electric scooters are still safe?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a good question. With the e-scooter is quite small, right? So the perception is maybe it's not as safe, right? But given the size compared to a car, compared to a much larger vehicle, but e-scooter, as we know now, it's going through a very rigorous standard, both from the design, from testing, and then from certification, right? We have to go through, like, to bring our scooter to Korea, we have to go through specific Korean certification. We have to go to certification in Germany, certification in Japan, and Israel, right? So all these are very high standard certification requirement. And that being said, within our design, there's a couple elements, right? One is, to make the scooter as visible as possible, right? Especially sometime during nighttime riding or et cetera. So we have a very yellow scooter, which is, you don't see that much yellow in the automobile space, right? So, it definitely stands out, and, help, at least drivers, other pedestrians to see it, right? And second, our scooter is much bigger than your normal private scooter or your normal sharing scooter. It's a bit more comfortable, right? It's especially when you go over some humps and etc. And it has a double physical brake, right? Because sometimes you see a scooter with only electric brake or only one hand brake. We have has both mechanical and electric brake on it. And we also have a little bit bigger space to stand than normal, right? So it's a bit more comfortable and focused on safety. And our tire is not like an air tire; it's like a solid, right? So we use actually two different rubbers, right, to make it more soft. So you can never have a tire puncture. And in terms of also from then we have a suspension, like front suspension, right? We're one of the first one to introduce. And in terms of technology, also the scooter has an IoT, like a connected device on it. It connects to the server every 30 seconds, right? It can, when it's in riding, right, by the customer. When it's not riding, it still connects to the server every 10 minutes, and the report all the status of the scooter, right? And if the scooter won't start or stop, it alerts the server, and then we do not allow the scooter to be used by the customer, right? And also, if the scooter does report going to accident, right, we actually report to the server right away, and then it gets reported to our operation team, and who will then alert, right, and then both contact the customer as well as to help report and call emergency help is needed. So in fact, I would say scooter is actually a smart scooter like ours in the sharing space. It's actually much more safer than a private scooter or than from both hardware design and from operation perspective. But at the end of the day, we have to ask our customer to behave also well, right? To not only through user education, through etc. But we do not allow them to ride on the sidewalk, right? To ride in like dangerous, just like any person who are behind the wheel, right? Ultimately, they are the one who need to make sure to have the safety of everyone in mind, right? So, overall, safety is one of our, we constantly do user education, and safety is one of the most important concerns for us as a company, right? Both from hardware, software, and from operational user perspective.
Thank you. Okay, let's go back to the hydrogen part a little bit, as hydrogen vehicles and the electric cars are the two segments that a lot of people are focusing for the vehicle side of it. Adeel, why is the infrastructure development of the hydrogen fueling so slow, as you have worked with numerous sectors, including government agencies? If you can share a little bit on why it's so slow, even in early adoption countries like Korea, Japan, and China. If you have some view, that'll be helpful.
Sure. So, this is maybe my personal opinion. I don't think it's that slow. I think probably, Korea, I think, has the most, hydrogen vehicles on the road worldwide. I think it ranks something like fourth when you adjust for, how many cars per charging stations. I think it's something like 180, whereas in countries like the US or Germany, it's maybe 40. So it's a high ratio. But I think, that perhaps is due to the fact that you've got a very small number of cars that's grown rapidly, and so that number is slightly out of sync. I think partly it's due to the fact that where you can put a charging station, there are some limitations on that. If the government has worked to ease those restrictions, for example, you can now put a hydrogen charging station in the green belt, or I think close to some parks. So I think that number, and I think as part of kind of broader policy, that number of stations will go up. And so you should see a ratio that perhaps resembles, other countries with smaller ratios, such as the US or in Germany. But I think as the number of cars has grown quite rapidly, the number of stations perhaps hasn't grown as rapidly. But I think you should see that change perhaps in the next year or so.
Thank you, Adeel. Okay. I'll hand over to Rowan.
Thank you very much, Sandra. It's been an absolute pleasure to have our expert panelists here today to give us their expertise and insights on all things future mobility. The Chamber looks forward to working with its members to not only leverage some of these opportunities in future mobility to overcome some of the challenges that were highlighted today in the session. In wrapping up, I'd like to thank Dr. Shin from GGGI, Jeff Manor from Audi Korea, Adeel Ahmad from Intralink Korea, Casey Hyun, our insider expert on all things mobility, and Eric Wang from Wind Mobility. And finally, I'd like to thank our moderator, Sandra Park from Woodside Energy. If you have any questions, be sure to contact AustCham Korea, and we'll be sure to pass them on. From me, the Chamber, and everyone here today, thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.